What's up, guys? This is Heis, and welcome back to Stories from the Shop, where we talk about railroad stories that have been in part of my experience, whether it's at the museum or the BNSF or otherwise. And most of them have been BNSF stories. It's the big railroad provides for a unique environment, with certainly full of sound decisions and hard work, always, of course. And last time on Stories from the Shop, we talked about the time that I yelled at a coworker for the first and only time when I worked for the railroad. And I mentioned while telling that story that I had another story about the smiley-faced machinist who loved to ruin your day, and how I told him to break a locomotive. So, that's this story. We're going to tell that one today, as we foretold. Oh, and two things before we get there. One, these will be available soon. We got new prints. These are like way better than the current spring stuff. New store's coming. It's taking time. We'll get there. There'll be an announcement. All sorts of fun stuff. And the second thing is, hopefully it looks better. Looking at the preview of what my face looks like, it looks way better. We had this moment on a live stream recently when my camera was doing a goofy goof. And Chris Gill was just like, hey, buy a new webcam, and super chatted like $300 at me. And it was just like, oh, yeah, I could do that. So thank you, Chris Gill. We have obviously a new webcam, and it looks pretty spectacular, and it's not glitchy. So let me know if you like it too. All right, on to the story. So this story is about BNSF 3155, which I just tried to Google around because I couldn't remember. It was a weird Jeep. It's not like your standard GP38 or GP39. My brain was saying it's a GP50. I did some Googling around. It might be classified as a GP25 because they derated it. Something. There was some weird thing in the history of the locomotive that I do not recall that was part of the reason why it was a problem child. The typical Jeeps in the 30s and that series, or even a GP40, pretty standard electronics. But there were issues with the 50s series, both as SDs and GPs from EMD. They had Super Series wheel slip control that caused all sorts of stupid faults. And I think that was the reason that they ended up derating them. Whatever. Details. 3155 comes to the shop, and I want to say it was in for just a routine maintenance. And so as part of the maintenance, we had a pretty specific process. You'd have somebody do the FRA inspection, machinist and electrician, going through the specific line items that the FRA requires you to do and inspect on every maintenance. And at the same time, they would do an inbound inspection where they'd load the locomotive up, make sure it was doing everything you'd expect it to, and nothing that you don't want it to do. And then they would write all those things up. It would come to the maintenance building when its turn was up in the queue. We could really only get one done a day because we were a small shop. And then the maintenance would be performed, whatever the task was for the 184 or 368 day service, which usually involved topping off oil, changing a bunch of filters, all sorts of fun like that. And then it would go out for an outbound and get retested. And I don't remember the exact detail on this, but that was the best way process. And it was always this big sticking point at the shop that we were always highballing stuff into the maintenance building as supervisors. It was like, well, crap, we didn't have manpower to put on the inspection because we had to get everything else done and make sure we hit our number. So it'll just have to go in without being inspected. And so, things that you would discover on an inspection or discover during an inbound that you could easily change while doing the maintenance, like, oh, we found XYZ part was broken or isn't doing the right thing. You're already going to be in there tearing stuff apart. Do this while you're there, kind of thing. Sometimes that didn't happen, and that led to opinions from employees about management, which were all pretty much fair, because we were absolutely just like focused on getting our number and preventing the Eye of Sauron in Fort Worth from looking at us, more so than trying to do the proper procedures, which was frustrating. And that led to a lot of tension in the shop. So I can't remember if this engine got an inbound or not. But at some point during the maintenance process, they found that the valve springs for the exhaust valves had broken, cracked, and basically fallen off There was something wrong with the keepers of the valves too on several of the power assemblies. Power assembly being the actual cylinder itself. When you think of an ES&D diesel locomotive, part of the reason that they're so cool, and all locomotives are now, but when they first came out with these designs, they were revolutionary in that the block is just a big weldment, and you can actually just put whole brand new assemblies in it. So when you take a normal car engine apart, you take the heads off, you take all the accessories and everything off. Then you have to go and take the block and get it bored and whatever and get new rings and resize things and custom machine things and put it all back together. On big diesel locomotive like this, you can yank the whole cylinder out and put a brand new cylinder in. The old head's called a power assembly an HLP, a head, liner, and piston, because that's how they used to have to do it, and that's actually part of the reason why railroads moved away from the covered wagon style unit. You think of like an F unit or an E unit, the streamliners, they look so pretty and they're super cool with the full width car body. But with the full width car body and working in there and no access hatches, you had to take the head of the cylinder off. Then you had to take and disconnect the piston and pull the piston and connecting rod out. Then you could take the liner out piece by piece by hand using just what you got, no cranes, which is far from ideal. And so when they brought the car body of the diesel closer and made it more narrow, you had the access hatch. Companies could design lifting devices to just go in, grab the whole thing. You just disconnect the crab bolts on top to let the cylinder come free and disconnect the connecting rod and the basket and everything down at the crank end. And you just yank the whole power assembly out and put a whole new one in. So you can replace the whole engine and basically make it a brand new engine. Totally reboard everything with all the new parts just in one go, which is great. And that's what made ES&D super powerful and super easy to work on early on. And part of the reason why diesel became so much more attractive than steam is because you could just change parts, get one off the shelf, kapow, do the thing, move on with your life rather than custom machining a bunch of stuff, which is also why our shop ended up having literally no machine tools. It's fine. So 3155 has on the top of its assemblies the exhaust valves, and some of them are basically, it's just a hope and a prayer holding them in. The likelihood that the valve falls into the cylinder and then grenades the whole cylinder is pretty high because the keepers aren't there, and there was something wrong with exactly how that sets up, and I don't remember the exact details. I just remember every machinist in the shop being like, yo, this is no bueno. This is not good. We need to fix this. Like, these assemblies got to get changed. We didn't stock just those parts, and you wouldn't take just the head out. You have to change the whole assembly now, which is the flip side for maintenance, why things are not great. And at the scope of a railroad like BNSF, things are getting attention every so often. It probably was fine to just change the whole assembly, but if you were a small railroad and you needed the one little part and everything else is fine, it's less desirable because, oh my god, you're going to replace the whole expensive assembly for the one little valve piece? You know, it would not make sense, but at the scale of the big railroad, it did make sense. So anyway, everyone's saying we have to replace the assemblies. And so we go and try and figure it out. Hey, material, what do we have? And it turns out that we don't have any assemblies for this because it was a particular block in it because it was a GP50/25. It had a weird special power assembly. You might think, oh, well, they should all be the same, like they're all the same engine pretty much. Well, there's actually weird, minute differences, and the way that the railroad actually stocked and stored them was also different based on a number of different factors. You basically had a 567, a 645, and a 710 for the three types of blocks for EMDs. And the 645 and the 567 block are actually pretty much the same in terms of what assemblies they can take. Early 567s were different, but later on, a lot of 567 blocks ended up getting repowered with 645 assemblies to make them 645s. And that's talking cubic inches per cylinder, by the way. That's the power rating, and that's why a 567 cubic inch V16 roots blown in an early F unit gets you 1,000 or maybe 1,500 horsepower, and a turbocharged 710 And a GP60 is getting, like 4,000 basically, right? They really figured out how to squeeze the power out of these things. Based on what type of engine block it is, and then the sub-variant, like is it a 645? Is it a 645 E3? There's a bunch of different changes throughout time, and some of them affected what assemblies could go in, some didn't. Details and all that sort of stuff that I don't recall. But the big thing is that there's also an EPA emissions tier related to the cylinders themselves, and I don't know if it had anything difference with the sealing or the rings or anything, but I know the injectors were different, and BNSF just stocked the whole assembly as one thing, and you had to have the right head for the right injector, and if you didn't have the right one, you didn't have the right one. And we didn't have those assemblies. We had something like 20 or 30 different assemblies in stock at a time, because you would change out assemblies. It was a monthly thing at least on one engine or another, it felt like. But we didn't have one for 3155. Okay, so we've figured out, for whatever reason, particular assembly with particular EPA emissions thing, it's going to take a long time for the assemblies to show up. And it needed 4 of them. There were 4 cylinders that had this problem. And so we looked at it, and it's like, it's going to be at least 2-3 weeks. And so we told upper management, like, oh, this thing's it's gonna have to wait for this. We can't let it go run. And upper management wanted to keep the railroad running. And understanding their point of view, I mean, that's the call that you have to make, right? Like, we're talking about a chance that we blow up an assembly in the engine. Is it going to happen? Is it not? This is a preventative thing that we want to fix, but we don't have the material. And basically the question and the discussion came down to, are we going to let this thing sit laid up at the shop, having us look bad? We're holding this engine for 3 weeks or whatever it was going to be. Or do we let it go out and go get used and hope it doesn't break, basically? And no one knew just how easy it was going to break or not. And I was arguing with the guys, like, let's have quality stuff, let's fix the locomotive, make sure it's in good shape. Like, I want to be proud of what we're working on at the shop. So I was with the machinists, and we got finished with our 5 o'clock turnover midway through second shift. And my boss, he was a great leader, and he was trying to run the railroad as a business, as savvy as he could. And I don't disrespect his opinion of, like, hey, it's not going to do any good. It could at least go do something, and if it breaks, it breaks, and we're changing the assemblies anyway. Like, what's the big difference, right? Okay, maybe it breaks something else, but that's a really small chance on top of we're already theoretically going to change broken assemblies, right? It's already partially broken. And as a good faith measure to the machinists and to not just discredit them, I was like, well, can we try and test it and make sure that it'll survive? And he goes, yeah, you could do that. That's okay. But it's going to be released. If it doesn't break by the end of shift, it's going to go. It's going to go pull freight, and that's going to be that. We'll get the assemblies in, we'll request it back, and we'll change them out when they get here. But if it can't be broken today, it's going to release today. We have numbers to make. We have a railroad to run. Okay. So I walked out to my machinist, Mr. Smiley Face, after lunch, because our turnover meeting was right during their lunch, which is actually dinner at 5 p.m., but it's your mid-meal shift, second shift, so lunch. And I walked up to him, and everybody, all the machinists had been crowding around this little smoking break area that we had, and everyone had been kind of staring over at the 3155, idling away, ready for its outbound. And everyone's like, are they going to let this go? Like, what? Oh my God, are they going to... upper management doesn't care about our work. Everyone is gossiping. And I walked up to them right after lunch, and they're all still sitting there. And I walked up to Mr. Smiley, and I was like, hey, Tom, you see that locomotive over there? And he goes, yeah, the one that we're all going to talk about that you guys are going to release? And I was like, yes, Tom, I'm sorry. They want us to release it, and they want it to go pull freight. But they said that we could test it. Tom, you have 5 hours to break that locomotive, or it's going to go. Do it. Do whatever. Test it however you want. You like breaking things. You have 5 hours. Break the choo-choo. And I mean, like a pig in poo, man. I mean, he just lit up like a Christmas tree. Like, oh my God, I've just been told to destroy stuff at work. Like, he was very excited. And so he ran over and flagged the unit up. And I mean, he was so mean to that thing. He did everything to try and get that engine to brake. He went, not even using the throttle. He just started grabbing the lathe shaft with the governor and running it to full RPM and back and everything. Anything to try and vibrate and break those valves. It's like, do it, Tom. Checked in with him at break. It's like, how's it going? He's like, that thing won't break. Oh, he was getting all frustrated. And it's like, well, if you don't get it done, if you don't kill it by the end of second shift, it's gotta go. Sorry. And Tom didn't kill it. He could not break the freaking locomotive. But he had a hell of a time trying, for most of a shift. Just try to do that. Must have been a fun day for him instead of changing parts. Oh yeah, go beat this to death. Okay. And so it came to the end of second shift. They went home. I said goodbye to second shift, started briefing third shift right at 10 p.m. Went back up to the office, released the locomotive good for power from the computer, and out it went. And it went back to Everett, Washington, and it pulled freight for a couple weeks. The assemblies came in. We brought it back, changed the assemblies out, and that was that. It didn't fail. It never dropped a valve. And we ended up changing it out preventatively anyway. So it was a good case of, we believed in the guys, but we had to run the railroad, and we took a small risk at doing that, but that's what ended up working out. So it's just one of those funny things. Like, okay, well, how's this going to work out? And it was just the talk of the shop. I mean, all of the machinists, they were so mad. Like, they're just going to let it go. And it's like, Everett needs a switch engine. They have only so many engines, and some of them are out of service. Like, this one is capable of pulling. It might fail on them, and that would suck, but the chances are small. I mean, you ask the machinists, like, well, what's the chances that they're going to drop a valve? And none of them knew. None of them were able to give like oh yeah, it's for sure going to happen, or maybe in a year it'll happen. So we did the preventative maintenance when we could. And we ran the railroad while we could. So it was a bit of an interesting one, but definitely a little bit of shop dynamics. So anyways, guys, I hope you liked this story. Hope you liked the new camera, and keep your eyes out and peeled for merch announcements in the near future here. So anyways, thanks so much for watching. We will catch you all next time.